critique. And on your page, I would write something like assignment 1, constructive line. Planar shape composition. I know I'm misspelling everything. I'll use spell check in a minute. Final drawing. Or something to that effect. Wow, I'm really bad at spelling. Okay. And then I would say something like general idea. And underneath general idea, you might say something like compositional approach. You might say something like process. You might say something like technique. You might say something about finish. You might say something about perspective. You might say something about, let's see, what else? Scale. And you might say something about proportion. So, you know, these are kind of all of the various ideas that we were exploring in this particular project. Okay, then you might say something about other student observations. So this would be wherever you had some ideas that you gleaned from other people's critiques. You know, oh, I like how they did this. I need to absorb that lesson from the critique and integrate it into my own drawing. Does that make sense? Or you might see something that somebody does wrong and you say, oh, I do that too. I need to watch out for that in my next composition. Because just because we're moving on to cylindrical shapes in this module doesn't mean we're not going to continue with rectilinear shapes as the semester unfolds. So everything we're learning now is going to be applicable to later drawings, and a lot of the constructive line techniques, the diagramming, the measurement of height and width, scale and proportion, directional relationships, the constellation of shapes within a still life. All of these things are going to be applied to the cylinder as well. Now, in addition to other students' observation, and you would just have, you know, bullet points there, you would have my critique observation. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? So, you know, just have, you know, room on your page so that you can, you know, fill out all of these notions. All right, so with, you know, the general idea of the project, and I'm going to make this bigger just to give it more emphasis.
Are we supposed to be able to see the screen?
Oh, you're not seeing the screen?
I'm not. I don't know if everybody else is.
Yeah, we haven't been seeing whatever it is you're typing.
Okay. So it would be really helpful if as soon as somebody notices that I'm not sharing the screen, that you say, Professor Wilson, you big idiot, you're not sharing the screen. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, guys.
It's okay.
You have to prod me. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm human too. So compositionally, Ming, what was our compositional approach here? What were we supposed to stay within as far as the boundaries of our compositional focus?
Closed composition, just like stay, make it as big on the paper as you can without actually going off the paper.
Okay, so closed composition was one of the restrictions that I limited you to. All right, could somebody explain just in general, when I say process, what do I mean by process? Cassandra?
Do you mean by process the way in which we're doing the drawings? As in
Yes.
Angulation and sorry, I'm having trouble thinking today.
That's okay. So talk to me about, I would place technique, and I would call it the constructive line technique, right? It's constructive line drawing. That's the technique. All right. And you said a word like triangulation. What are some other techniques that we use within diagrammatic drawing or a constructive line drawing? Methods. Triangulation. What are we doing when we're comparing height and width? We are, what do you do with a tape measure? You measure.
Measuring?
Yes, indeed. Measuring. Okay. What about when we're trying to find the right angle? What are we doing? What is that called? I said it. Oddly enough. Why is this being all weird and freaky? You see this? There we go. Okay, nobody's going to bite on that one. We are angle finding or directionality. Okay, in a still life itself, when we're looking at the overall shape of the various objects within that still life, we're looking at the blank of shape. When we're looking at how all the objects relate to each other and form either an overall triangle, an overall square, an overall rectangle, we're looking at the blank of shapes. Composition is part of it, but that's more about how it's fitting on the page. Okay, so when I look at how the stars are relating to each other and they're creating a shape, I'm looking at the relationships. Yeah, but I use the specific term that's astronomical. Constellation of shape, right? Constellation. So these are all kind of ideas technically. So if those are all ideas of technique, then what is process? How do we kind of go through from the beginning of the drawing to the end of the drawing so that we're starting off with nothing and winding up with a finalized drawing? What is kind of the order of process, the way you use your material, etc.? Anybody want to kind of describe that?
Like pressure.
Okay. So what about pressure?
So when you're first like starting out, you don't use as much pressure so that if you like change a line, it's not as prominent at the end. And then like once you like are more confident with your lines, then you go back in with like a darker pencil and you go over like just the one line that's like correct. Sorry, that was like scattered, but
Yep, so light and loose to dark and tight, right? You also work from general, simple, to what? If you start off with the general, what are you probably working to or towards as you get darker with your pressure?
Complex.
Yeah, complex. Complex and what's the opposite of general? Specific. Does that make sense to everybody? I don't expect you to know all these things because we've just been doing them. I've been using all of these words, yes, but it's another matter altogether to kind of remember them. All right. So finish would be what you were talking, and who was that? Was that you, Lauren, who just spoke?
No, I think it was Cassandra. I'm not sure.
Okay, Cassandra. So finish would be dark, tight, straighter lines, more emphasized lines that give you that appearance of finality, right? This is my final statement. This is my final answer. All right. What is perspective? Somebody define perspective.
Is it how we see like the still life or the model?
Okay. So does Elijah see the model or the still life differently than you?
Yeah, I guess it's unique to each person.
Okay. And that's because of each person has a different perspective or a different, I used another word or another phrase.
Point of view.
Point of view.
Point of view, right? So the viewer's relationship or the artist's relationship to the still life. Okay. What does scale mean?
The size of the objects you're looking at
The size of them relative to what?
to each other? Or would that be proportion?
Well, sort of.
Okay.
The size of the objects relative to each other, but more importantly, relative to the,
Artist.
no,
Page.
The
To
paper?
or-
importantly, to the page.
Oh,
The
okay.
size of the object relative to the page. So, if we're trying to do a closed composition where everything, oh my gosh, my computer. I finally got my adapter, so I'm going to be able to use, feel like I'm swiping my credit card. Or trying to chip it, and then it doesn't want to chip. Oh. Fine, be that way. What a waste of time. Maybe if I just spelled right, then it wouldn't be a problem. More importantly, to the page. So size of the object relative to each other, but more importantly, the size of the object relative to the page. So for instance, we're doing an open composition. I want you to make the objects as big as you possibly can, i.e., I want you to make their scale as large as they can possibly be without going off the page. Does that make sense? All right, and then proportion. What does proportion mean? Anyone? Anyone?
How big the shapes are, like their height and width.
Okay. So height and width, if I'm looking at a single shape, that defines to what? of the shape as a whole to blank. So height and width define to blank of the proportions of the object.
Relationship?
They could be relationship. What else? I'm comparing my height with my width. I'm comparing I'm measuring the relative what?
Line?
Well, a line is part of it. That's how we record our observations of proportion. But if I'm measuring height and width, I'm measuring the blank of the height relative to the blank of the width.
The length of the height?
Okay, so length, another word would be shoe blank. I wear a size 10. What's the word? Size. Size of parts relative to the whole shape. Okay? So, like if I'm looking at my hand, everybody look at your hand. All right, take your index finger of your left hand and your thumb of your left hand and hold open your right hand. Now measure from the tip of your birdie finger with your index finger of your left hand to the bottom of your birdie finger with the thumb of your left hand. Okay, so that we're measuring the birdie finger of our right hand. Everybody understand that? Now take that measurement and hold it and put your thumb or your index finger at the bottom of your birdie finger. What do you notice about the size of the birdie finger relative to the size of the palm? Huh? Is it? It's about the same. So they're very similar. Maybe not precisely the same. Do you follow me? But they're about the same. So that's the size of the finger, which is a part of the hand, versus the size of the palm, which is a part of the hand, which is the whole hand. You follow what I mean? So, you know, we're looking at the size of the top relative to the size of the front, or the size of the right side relative to the size of the front. Does that make sense? Those are all proportional relationships. Height versus width. These are all proportional relationships. All right. Does that make sense to everybody? So this is generally what we're looking at. Proper angles, proper relationships between various parts of the shape, proper proportions, an accurate reckoning of the perspective of the artist, an accurate compositional constellation as far as the size of the individual parts relative to other parts within the still life, proper scale, proper compositional approach, as far as being a closed composition as large as it can be without going off the page, so the correct scale, and of course the right finish, those dark, decisive lines at the end, okay? So what we're gonna do is I'm going to complain a little bit first, because I love complaining. Complaining is always fun, to me. I know it's not fun to you, but it's fun to me. I'm gonna open up this file. And the first thing I want to notice, remind me of your name? Alexa. What do you notice? These are all the students' drawings that were turned in. What do you notice about, what's a major difference you notice? Just looking at the screen the way it is, it's not complicated. What's a major noticeable difference between about half of these images versus the other half? Excuse me? The file what? Ah, so some people actually followed my directions on the file name, and some people didn't follow my directions on the file name. Remember I said you have to title each file a certain way. Why do I care? Why does it make a difference? Why is Professor Wilson so picky? because he's just a weirdo and he's obsessive compulsive and he's demanding and mean and all that stuff. Why would that make a difference to me?
So you can distinguish what photo or what assignment we're on.
So I can know this assignment so that I can know the student and whose assignment it is, and so that we can start to learn the professional standards within the world of art of how you title files and how you title works of art on the wall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for your own personal sanity, how you archive your work, say on your computer or on an external hard drive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense? So I'm introducing you to a professional system, and you need to follow it. So I had to go through and like title these with specific people's names versus these people who all titled their files correctly. All right, now the next thing I want to notice is let's look at Cassandra's, because we want to be mean to Cassandra, because Cassandra's mean to us, right? She's always so mean and hateful. Right, Cassandra?
No.
I'm just teasing you. You know that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. What do you notice about these various drawings and the photographic quality of the various drawings? Anybody notice anything?
They're all of various saturations.
Yeah, they have a difference in hue. So for instance, Cassandra's looks very yellow. Cassandra, were you working on yellow paper?
No, I think that might have happened because of the lighting.
Yes, it did. All right. What about this one? This is Wyatt's. Wyatt, were you working on newsprint or white paper? Oh, so you're supposed to be working on white paper. And Lauren, were you working on white paper or newsprint?
White paper.
Okay. So it's interesting because yours looks like newsprint, even though it's white paper.
It's
Now, you might be like, well, Professor Wilson, I don't have all the fancy software that you have, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Microsoft Office Lens and your iPhone and your Android should all have photo editing software.
I used Office Lens.
Okay. So what you would do, and I'll show you in preview. Oops. And this is a Mac, but PCs have photo editing software on them as well. Is you're going to look at levels. So for instance, I feel like Cassandra's needs to be desaturated. Ta-da! Does that look whiter and more better? Mo better? Does that look mo better, Cassandra?
Yes, sir.
And then I could also, like, it doesn't really seem white. It seems a little bit gray. Does that seem a little bit whiter? So I changed the exposure and I changed the temperature saturation. Does that make sense? So these are ways that you can improve the drawing. I wonder if we could take Wyatt's and fake people out with it. Make the professor believe that he actually did it on white paper. Well, I think your lines are a little bit light to begin with, so I don't think we're going to be able to do it. Because you see, as I increase the contrast, we lose some of the lines of the drawing. That's better, but you notice there's like a halo around it, and that's because of lighting. One of the best things that, and I'll show you in a second, so I'm just going to shut up now. And then Lauren, we'll look at yours real quick. Again, we have like kind of a halo effect around it. But we can get a little bit better, yes? Even though it's got this weird thing. what's happening is this is like the spotlight effect. Whereas Cassandra, how did you get such an even surface tone? Meaning you don't have these vignetting shadows on your work.
I just placed it on the ground and took a picture of it using office lens.
Where?
Just in the middle of the room,
In the
where the
middle?
light directly on it.
Okay. Sometimes you can use like fluorescent bulbs can be helpful. You know, like if you put it on the ground and then you stand like on a couch or on a chair above it and take the picture from far away. That way you're not casting shadows on it. Fluorescent bulbs tend to create a diffuse light, unlike these spotlights, which tend to create a halo effect. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And, you know, I'm not going to give you a hard time about it now, but as we move forward, I want to see more professional photographs. Okay. You guys are still seeing my screen?
Yes.
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 Sir,
Yeah.
I have a question about the photo editing. Is
Uh-huh.
for when we're editing our photos, is the goal to make the photo look as much like the actual drawing as possible, or is the goal to enhance it?
No, the goal is to make it to look as close to the drawing as possible.
Okay, all right.
And if you're working on a white page, that means the page needs to look white.
All
Now, one
right.
of the problems is if you're in a low light room and you look at the drawing versus outside versus in this room, which is lit, it's going to look different in all the context. So in a way, you're trying to create like an abstract middle. You know, what would it look like if it was professionally lit, white, the colors right, the intensity of the marks are right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense to everybody?
Hmm.
So one of the ways to do that is this. Talk about photographing your work. Right now I'm in my studio, and indoor lighting is really not the best lighting to use to photograph your work. So here I've got yellow, sometimes too blue. So here I'm in my studio, and you can see that it's kind of got a yellowy quality to it. And that's because of the fluorescent lighting that I have. It's a warmer bulb. The good thing about this is that there's no shadows. So that's an excellent advantage to photographing the work in a vertical manner. If I'm photographing it from above, you can see that there's a shadow from my hand. Sometimes there'll be a shadow from you. So you want to try to... So you can see down here in the corner, over here, there's like shadows being cast. You don't really notice them, but they're there. So I go outside, and a perfect day to photograph your work is when it's overcast. So cloud cover. Even if the sun just goes behind the cloud for a little while. Today would be a perfect day to photograph your work. You just lay it on the ground, get above it, photograph it. If it's too sunny, you can go underneath a tree canopy that's very dense, but it's getting ambient light from the sun around it. And as long as that sun isn't shining through the tree canopy and creating like a dappled light effect, you're going to get this reflective light as opposed to direct light. Does that make sense? So here I went outside and put my work up on a clip. I turned my camera sideways, and you can see the lighting is very, very even across the surface of the composition. Okay? So that's going to be your best bet as far as lighting of the composition. All right? So enough of that. Okay. Really don't like what's happening. All right, so now I'm going to open up my iPad and we're going to look at some of y'all's drawings and just kind of have our first initial critique. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen over here. Okay, and I'm going to start sharing on my iPad. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen broadcast here. I'm going to go into Procreate, and we're going to talk about this particular drawing. Whose drawing is this?
That's mine.
Who's me?
Ming.
Ming?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Ming's drawing. All right, let's see. Joshua, talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in Ming's work and some of the good stuff that you're seeing and some of the stuff that you'd like to see improvement on.
As far as the good stuff that I see, I'm actually really impressed with the line quality compared to something like my work, where there's a lot of, even when I try and make the darker lines, these lines are just very, very nice.
Why are they nice? Don't just say they're nice. Why are they nice? Try to describe their niceness.
I'd say that it allows the objects within the composition to pop out.
Okay. So good
again,
contrast.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd say proportion-wise, I'd say she did pretty well with the proportions in terms of the objects in relation to one another and their own shapes. If anything, I think she would just need to work on making sure that the parallels stay parallel with each other. So, for example, that bottom brick piece down there.
This?
Yes, sir, right there. You see how one of the line closest to us, the vertical-ish line closest to us, kind of bends in.
So you're talking about this movement versus this movement?
Hold on.
Or no, you're not talking about that. You're talking about this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So straightening that up so that a straighter line like that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And even the one down there that you mentioned, and I mean that's one of the biggest things that I just noticed right off the bat.
So does that look better?
Yes, somewhat.
Okay. I feel like it's too big. Doesn't that look too big?
Yeah, slightly.
So I feel like probably what happened is the height of this box is too big. Because notice, Ming, as look at this relationship here between the bottom of this box and the bottom of that box and the bottom of your box and that box. Do you see that, Ming?
Yeah.
So because you made this too far down, instead of having it up here like this, you see? That would have moved your brick up more into this position. And that's going to give you a better proportioned brick. Do you see that?
Yep. Thank you.
Now, the other thing that I would notice is this. it's more like that, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the other thing that I would notice, and I know you feel picked on, Ming, but get over it. I'm just teasing you. I love you. I think this line was correct. And I think that, and I'm going to have to switch because I'm starting to get messy here. It's probably, look at this shape versus this shape in the drawing now. Do you see how this plane is much shorter than this plane?
Yeah.
But if we go back to your drawing, you see how they're roughly equal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So another thing that I would say is, these lines always need to be vertical. This line needs to be vertical. Remember, that means that it's the same distance away from the page. I think generally speaking, all of your angles are good. It's just a little bit about a proportional inconsistency here. And those lines being, kind of crooked as opposed to straight up and down. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Scale-wise, I think you're good. I think you're good as far as the size of the parts relative to the page. I just think that there's, it's really about those vertical lines. And, again, when you're looking at an object, look at this size relative to this size. That's about 1/3 of the front plane. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So these are very important things to recognize. I think that this top box might be a little bit too wide, but not by much. All right. So let's see here. How do I do this quickly? Okay. So now I'm going to bring in some other works. And we probably won't take as long on each of the works because I want to get to other things. But I do want to give you all kind of an experience of the critique. Each of you will be talked about. It's just a matter of whether we'll get to talk about it at length. So I pulled out that one, which would be this photo. Whoa. Oh my God. There we go. Is that the correct photo? Yes?
Yeah, that's it.
And who is this?
It's Kaylee.
Okay, Kaylee. Ming, talk to me about Kaylee's work.
I like. It looks like a lot of the angles are correct, and I think she edited it really well so that we can see some of the triangulation and some of the like some of the process, but not all of it so much that it looks messy.
Uh-huh.
I think her top, like the tall rectangular box, I think is a little too short, but like I don't know, like I struggle with that too. I also feel like there's something off about the longest, like the long wooden plank, but other than that, I feel like it. Oh, and then maybe the like this small like skinny box laying on the plank.
Talking about this box.
The one right below it.
This box.
Yeah, I think the top line is maybe a little or not words. The one of the angles is like it should be steeper.
Hold on. I feel like her top angle is good. But that bottom angle needs to come more up.
Yeah.
If we do it this way, if I continue those lines in space, what happens to them? Do they converge or diverge?
Diverge. It's the same problem I had.
So if it's parallel with your line of sight, they should always converge. So it's
Yes.
probably a matter of pulling this down, which means she's squeezing towards the end of the page, which might have, it's really a lovely compositional arrangement as far as its size of the parts relative to the
Yeah,
whole.
I was gonna say like her closed composition is really good. Like she went all the way to the edge of the papers and it like without going off of it. It looks really good.
Yep. But I do think that you're right about this box being a little bit too wide on the side. Wide on the side. And I have a feeling that the reason why that happened is because she was trying to squeeze it in and she couldn't get the right height-width relationship. Because if I look at this relationship, they're not too dissimilar, right? But if we look at your relationship, if we look at this versus this, that's a lot bigger, right? Than this versus this. You see that, Kaylee?
Yeah, I see that. I was
Yeah.
kind of struggling a little bit with like getting the composition right.
Yeah, I think part of it is, this needed to be taller, number one, and this needed to come in a little bit, which would, of course, bring this in a little bit. But I think generally speaking, everything looks good and right to itself. All the angles are parallel except for in this box where we should have seen convergence. The verticals look vertical for the most part. This is a little bit off vertical. Okay, never mind. There's a lot going wrong. But I think generally you're fooling the viewer good enough to where it looks pretty pristine. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's insert another photo. Okay. And whose is this?
That would be mine. I quite literally added a bunch of spiders and ants.
Yeah, and I noticed that Cassandra did the same thing. I really appreciate you both being so diligent in following my instructions to the letter. This is the correct photograph, right?
Yes, sir, that should be it.
Okay. All right. Caitlin, talk to me about, or Kaylee, sorry, talk to me about who am I talking to?
You're talking to me, Kaylee.
But whose drawing is this?
That would be mine.
Who are you?
Josh.
Josh. Thank you, Josh. All right. So Kaylee, talk to me about Josh.
I would say he did a really good job with like the scale, because like it's like all the boxes are pretty good proportionally to each other. Also, I would say like some of the lines are a little bit off, like relative to each other. Like the very top box,
Mhm.
it kind of goes at an inward slant towards the bottom.
So you're saying that he should maybe straighten up this line so that it doesn't feel like it's quite leaning so much. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but it's not too off.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Negligible. He wasn't using a ruler, so that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. What about the finish of the drawing?
I would say maybe to darken up the lines a little bit.
So it's a little bit too light.
Yeah.
Okay. The only box that I have a proportional issue with is this one, really. Look at how they're roughly, well, I need to be more precise. Which is thicker, the front plane or the side plane?
The side one.
This one
Yeah.
is thicker than this one, right?
Yes.
Okay, now let's look at his. I think you're okay. It just feels a little bit wide. I think I would have just pulled it in just a little bit more,
Yeah, I can see that.
but it's negligible. So
Now,
to me, the main problem with your drawing is just the finish.
yeah.
And you did it on newsprint.
Now, would you? Because I did all this with an HB pencil. I don't really have any other pencils with me. Would you suggest me just finishing with the charcoal pencil?
You could have done that or just pressed a lot harder with your
Okay.
because you can get a lot of mileage out of a number 2 or HB pencil. But let's make sure that we're getting our supplies as soon as possible, okay? Everyone, not just you. I'm not just picking on you. All right. Okay. And which one is that? That one is this one. Right? All right. Whose is this drawing?
That one's mine.
Who's mine?
Caitlin.
Caitlin?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Otherwise known as Katie, right?
Yes.
So Joshua, talk to me about Katie's drawing.
Well, I guess first, I'd probably want to talk about the scale of the objects in relation to one another and how they replicate the objects on the picture itself. I'd say that's definitely something that needs to be worked on here.
Okay.
For example, there's the second box on the left to the top. Does that work? Yeah, that one. That one needs to be a lot shorter compared to the picture itself. The
Okay,
bottom
so let's stop for 1 second there. So if I'm looking at the length of this box, right, and I look at where it's touching on your drawing, okay, Katie, and I look at where it's touching here, why is that not letting me draw? And I look at where it's letting me touch here, do you see how much lower down it is?
Yes, sir.
So that whole box needed to be lower. I think that the shape of the box is fine as far as the proportions and its angle in space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I just think that it's too high relative to the top box.
Okay.
The other thing that I would notice is this versus this. So this whole line, because it's an angle going back in space, needs to be brought in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
This is going to come over a tad bit as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the problem with that is now we have to make some modifications here, which I don't think are that serious. I mean, that's not too major, is it? Bringing that in, is it? So that's not too bad, Katie. I think that we should be seeing this leaning against that. I think you're a little bit too thin here. You see how I thickened that up?
Okay.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And then I think you're good there. I think that there's a little bit of a box here. And then I think that this brick should also be thicker. I think you made it a little bit too thin. Does that make sense?
It does. I think I had the most trouble with the brick.
Because in your drawing, it looks like a little Toblerone candy box. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Everybody knows about candy. Okay. Why does it do that? All right, whose drawing is this? Who's mine?
I think that's mine, Lawrence. But that's mine.
Oh my gosh.
Can you hear me?
I can. So it's
Okay.
yours, Lauren?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So Katie, talk to me about Lauren.
Overall, it looks really good with like the proportions and everything. And she did really well with the close composition, I'd say. With like not going off the page, but trying to get it like as much page as possible. I'd say maybe some of the lines need to be a little straighter.
Yeah, so like this line kind of curving in like that feels a little awkward. I feel like this box is a little bit too big because I'm looking at, I should go down there. I'm basically looking at this relationship here, and you see how there's much more space over here, Lauren?
Yes, those two sides were my biggest nightmare. They were such a struggle to get the right size.
It's okay. Just so that you're aware that the size is wrong.
Yes.
I do feel like that this space is a little narrower than this space, and if it was wider, this guy would come over a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then what would that do? That would make him narrower, right?
Right. Just kind of sliding over.
And if he was narrower, he would look more like this box, because yours looks a little bit too wide, right?
Yes.
And the other thing I would say is this guy feels a little bit narrow in general, and the top feels too long.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
But I think overall, it's in pretty good shape. You know, there's just some length problems.
Yes.
Okay. And I think your finish looks pretty good. Nice and clear lines.
Thank you.
I even like some of these, like how they're darker here and then get a little lighter and a little darker and then dark again.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be nice when we get into contour drawing. I also like the fact that you're like this. You've got that tabletop. Now, is this
That one's not right.
is this on newsprint?
No, sir. This is on white paper.
Okay, we already asked that question. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I can answer it again.
All right, I'm going to start moving a little faster. Or trying to. So let's see, that was, gosh, I forgot what it looked like. Okay, there's there's a brick in there. Insert a photo. Where's the brick? Which one is it? Is it this one? Yeah. All right. Lauren, talk to me about this image.
I just think that
Wait, whose image is this?
That's mine, Elijah.
Elijah. All right.
Yeah.
Elijah.
I just think the shading, like line wise, you could probably clean up a little bit nicer just to be able to tell where your finished lines are. Um, just to make it a little bit darker and maybe kind of use an eraser to clean up the lines. But
Okay.
overall, the scale, I really like the proportions. I think maybe just that he did a really good job of kind of making it big as possible.
Unfortunately, he ran off the page.
So,
Yeah, I did.
yeah, he ran off the page. That's my struggle too. On the right side, but I think that he did a good job of like getting there. But just on the right side, he kind of struggled a little bit. But I think it looks really nice.
Talk to me
scale-wise.
about this box compared to this box.
It probably needs to be a little bit skinnier.
Okay, so this needs to come in, right?
Yeah.
More like that.
Yeah.
Okay. But what's that going to do to everything else? That's going to force everything to come over a little bit. Right, Elijah?
Yes, I think that's the problem of why it started going too far off the page.
So if we did that, I got to get rid of the tapping function. It goes immediately to eraser. Yeah, I'm wondering if we did that, would we be able to fit everything on the page? Ta-da!
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're mostly okay. I would also look at the top of this one and look at the top of this one and how it's much thinner and skinnier. Do you see that? Elijah?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Am I still muted? No, I'm not muted. Okay.
All right. Help me guys to remember this image. There's a cube. Oh. On the right-hand side towards the front. Is it this one? Yep. Why does it keep turning over? Tell me why. All right. Whose is this image?
It's mine. I'm Catherine.
Catherine.
Yeah.
Okay. Elijah, talk to me about Catherine.
All right, I'd say the first proportion, it's the top box, like the topmost box. I feel like that's pretty good, except it looks a bit skinnier than the original photo.
Okay.
The box immediately under it, the two size-wise, I think the two front-facing faces are accurate, but I think the issue is the angles because especially in the back, you can see that it makes the box seem, I don't know, like curved upwards or like kind of, I don't know how to put that best into words.
Okay, so stop for just a second.
Okay.
So the first problem is that this top box is too skinny, you said.
Yeah.
It can either be too skinny or it can be too tall. So we either have to make it shorter so that it seems squatter, you follow what I mean? Or wider so that it seems not so skinny. So if I do this, do we have a better proportion box now? Okay. So then I would ask this question, Catherine. Look at that angle and look at this angle. What do you notice about your angle versus that angle?
That one's a little like kind of curved, mine at least.
Well, it's not about curve. Look at
The
compare.
angle's just off.
It's too what? Too shallow or too steep?
Too shallow.
Right. So if we bring this in, it's going to look something more like this. I'm also noticing this little tiny triangular shape in front of it.
Yeah.
So we would need to make that shape tinier. And then I think this side is okay. But of course, the minute we do this, what happens to everything on this side of the composition? It all needs to be brought over, right?
Yeah.
So there's just some height width proportional issues and some triangulation issues that you need to kind of work on. The only other thing that I would say is just remember in these boxes, you're going to generally have parallel angles. So this angle and this angle are going to be parallel, and this angle and this angle are going to be parallel. So if we look at yours, notice how this and this are at two different angles.
Yeah.
They're diverging. Oh, the other thing that I was going to say is this. You see that?
Yeah.
You did a great job here. This is beautiful. The size of this relative to the size of this is really good. So you're getting good size relationships for the most part, but I think the height width things is where you're struggling a little bit.
Yeah,
Okay?
I agree.
I'm glad you agree. Stop saying take photo. All right. So which one did I just do? I did this one, right?
Yes.
Come on, Professor Wilson. Why is it not included? Oh. There's got to be a better way to do this. How do I get rid of all of these? I know. You guys are learning Procreate. And if anybody knows it better than me, please tell me, because I could use all the help I can possibly get. So boxes on the left. Is it this one? Let's see. Boxes on the left, so it's got to be this one. All right, Catherine, talk to me about whose is this that we're looking at? Yours? Okay. That's Ryan, right? Wyatt, you're Wyatt. Catherine, talk to me about Wyatt.
I'd say the first thing is the lines are pretty dark and they're like very noticeable, besides the fact the picture for the first box, the picture kind of, I guess the flash kind of washed out the first box lines a little bit. But I think the first box is also kind of unproportional, and that is
box?
like a lot of boxes.
You're talking about this box?
Yeah, the very top.
Okay.
It's too tall.
Shorter in order to be more proportionately accurate to the box that we're seeing. You see that, Wyatt?
Uh-huh.
All right. What
And
else?
I'd say it's all of the boxes are in the, what's it called? In the picture, but
towards the right of it, it looks like it's almost about to come off the page.
So it'd be nice to get it to slide kind of to the left a little bit.
Yeah.
I was also noticing that this cube actually goes behind the box that's in front of it. You see that, Wyatt? And then I think maybe this needs to move over so that we can get a little bit more of that box in. I also would say that, you know, in truth, like, first of all, I'm seeing too much of this side relative to the photograph itself. But look at this. Now, does it feel too close to the side of the page?
No.
Here where you messed up? So it was this length. Look at how big you made it over there.
Yeah.
So, you know, sometimes we've got it. We just don't realize that we've got it and we mess it up. I would add, you know, some more decisive, darker lines would be helpful as well. Okay. Let's see this one. Rip to the right. This one. Oops. Hunter, you're messing me up, left and right. This the correct one?
Yes.
Okay. So Wyatt, who are we talking to?
Ryan.
Ryan Beeson. Okay. Wyatt, talk to me about Ryan.
Well, I mean, it looks really good to start with. In the top left, the first thing I kind of noticed, the farthest left box, you just see a little bit too much of those planes.
Okay, so if we're talking about that, you're talking about this box here?
Down to the
This
left.
box.
Yeah, both.
So the first thing would be that this box needs to be shallower or narrower. Do you see that, Ryan?
Yes.
You made it a little bit too wide, which is going to change this box that's on top, because it comes down a little bit below that box, like so. Does that look better, Wyatt? And then I'm noticing this line is just a vertical line, because all you're seeing is the front and the top. Does that make sense? Oops. Ryan, does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. This box, I'm seeing, look at this space versus the space over here. So in reality, you should be seeing something like this. And look at how much narrower the top looks now. Do you see?
Yep.
Okay. And then, of course, this guy feels a little bit out of scale. It would probably be, well, first of all, I noticed that this is a horizontal line, so the horizontal should come over. This should be closer to horizontal. I think you're okay with the front plane, though. It should be a little bit more square, which is going to bring your brick down. Okay, and then your little cube, if I notice, it lines up with the bottom of that top box. So if that's the case, then that's going to make my cube And that's those, relationships vertically and horizontally. Scanning is what that's called. That's another
Okay.
term I neglected to mention. You see how that scale looks better now relative to the whole still life?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right. This one, so this is Cassandra, or otherwise known as Catherine, for some reason. Stop pressing, take a photo. So, Cassandra, got a brick. No, that's a book. It's this one. Right, Cassandra? Cassandra, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Ryan, talk to me about Cassandra.
So the first thing that kind of stands out to me is the top box that's up and down seems skinnier than what it should be. I think it should be a little bit wider.
Skinnier or?
It's too tall.
Okay, so it can either be too skinny or too tall. Either way, the height and width proportions are off. So if that's the case, would it look better? Maybe about right there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right, what else?
I think the box right below it might be also a little bit slightly too skinny. The one that's forward facing, yes. The one that's in front of it and the one it's standing on.
So that means that this has to come over in order to make it wider, right? And it needs to be a little bit shorter. Cassandra, do you see how I've changed the proportions of that?
Yes.
Does that look better, Ryan?
Yes, I'd say so.
Now, here's another triangulation issue. You see that triangulation issue, Cassandra?
Yes, I see that.
So it should be out a little bit more, which is going to make this a little bit longer, right? Which is going to make this a little bit longer. Does that make sense, Cassandra?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so we just make some adjustments. I think you've got some pretty good proportion here and here. I think your height and width in some of these boxes are good. It was just the top of the still life that was a little bit funky. All that said, if we go back to the very beginning of the drawing, Ryan, what is something that you could give her great kudos for?
I would say the boxes you circled looked really good with the proportions and the point of view. I'd also say the scaling for the large plank box at the very bottom seems to be done really well.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Why do you have a thought about how hers is kind of really nice in a certain way?
The lines are really clean.
Okay, so clean, finish. Right? Now we still can see some diagrammatic stuff here, so that's good. The only other thing I would do, Cassandra, is scale up just a tad, just a little bit bigger, and it would have filled the page better. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Another thing that I want to say is I'm critiquing you guys. So you're writing down your critiques, and you're like, okay, so we've already talked about this. Ming, no, we haven't talked about yours, have we, Ming?
We did. It was the first one.
Oh, so we did talk about it?
Yes.
Okay. That makes me happy. sort of. Not that I don't love talking about your work, but that means we're further along than I thought. So that would be this one. Whose is this? Okay, remind me of your name?
Alexa.
Alexa. So which photo is it, Alexa?
It's the top two.
These? Someday I'm going to figure out, why that happens. Okay. So, Cassandra, talk to me about Alexa.
Well, I think she did a good job. The lines are really good when it comes to getting darker. I would say that the brick is the one thing that really stands out to me that's a little off. It's too long. I think it should be shorter.
You see that difference? So again, you've got to scan, relative to other objects. So if I bring this up, and then all I do is transfer that same angle and now my brick feels not perfect, but a little bit better proportion than it previously did. Do you see that? So I just think it needs to be a little bit shorter, a little bit wider, and I think we'd be in good shape. Okay. What else, Cassandra?
Well, the box to the right, I think some of the angles are slightly off. And the lines could be a little straighter.
And I also think that this front plane could be a little squarer. It feels a little bit too rectangular, which is going to bring this box up. And in order to keep it rectangular, we're going to have to bring it in a little bit. Does that make sense, Alexa? So I would say that overall we're okay. There does feel like a dip down here. So I think that we need to have more of an angle this way. In order to make that box feel like it's not sagging down in the background. Remember, this angle, and sometimes you can just draw through things to make sense of the world. You see what I mean? Okay. We got 2 more to go. This is Maeve, are you here? All right, I'm going to critique Maeve since she's not here. Which one was it? This one? Okay. So I think Maeve has a pretty good size, though I think it should be bigger. I think another good practice for you guys to do is what I just showed on Alexa's drawing. Draw through the objects. Because when you don't, look at how you have an altitude change there. You see what I mean? So if you just draw through lightly and then darken on either side, you're going to get a contiguous line instead of picking up your pencil and starting on the other side. Does that make sense? Hunter? Okay. So hard to read expressions in this class. I think the proportions of everything look pretty good. I think that this top box feels a little bit too wide in the front. Yes? Would we agree with that? Hunter? Yes, I agree with you, Professor Wilson. I don't know why there's space here between the little cube and that big box. There shouldn't be. So that's got to come in order for there to be no space. I think overall it's pretty good proportions, just little tweaks. More about finish and straightening the lines than anything else. All right, I think we got one more. Whose is this? Hunter, that's yours?
No,
Jonathan, that's yours. Have we critiqued yours, Hunter?
yeah, I was going to talk about that.
Okay. Jonathan, which one photograph is yours?
I think it was the very first one. No, not that.
So there's a long box cube on the left. Right?
Yeah, that was it. Well, I'll have to consider higher. It's a little more, like I was able to see that corner of the table. I think it's
This one?
the second to last. Yeah.
This one. Okay. So frustrating. This one. No. This one. Okay. So who talked last? Besides me? What in the world is going on? There it is. This program is a mind of its own sometimes. Okay. So we're talking about Jonathan, Elder, right? Hunter, do you want to go ahead and talk about Jonathan's? Okay.
The box on the very top seems like it's too far back in comparison to the one below it.
When you say too far back, I don't understand what you mean.
It feels like it's further away than in the picture. I mean, the picture.
Well, the first thing that I noticed about the top box is I like this plane as far as its height and width, but I feel like this plane may be a bit long because when I look at this increment compared to this increment, you see how they're the same. So it's a little bit wide, which is going to bring this box in, right? And this box is going to now have to come in. And actually that's about it as far as correction is concerned. Does that make sense? I think that, some of these lines just need to be, refined.
I think maybe that front face on the second box is up a little bit on there.
You mean
so that it,
angle up more?
Yeah, so it looks like so it would make the other one forward.
Well, I think one of the things is that this box is overhanging the box that's underneath it. So I think that's part of the, that's going to be a function of shading. Now, the only other thing that I would say, Jonathan, is that should be your composition. Because you got all of this negative space down here. Waste. Okay? All right, so let's talk about what we're doing next. I'm going to show you a short video, which you can watch again at your leisure. So let me reduce this a little bit. I'm going to stop sharing My iPad's, well, yeah, I guess I need to stop. All right, so now we're back to sharing this screen. All right. So I'm going to go to Google Chrome, which is already open. I'm going to pull this up, hit the save button. And if we go to content, we're still under module 1, but we're about to transition into module 2. So under module 1, readings and resources, you'll see right here, part 2 of assignment 1, which is cylindrical shapes. So we're going to watch this. And I'm going to kind of run through it pause style, if it works. There we go. Because I'm not sure we have quite enough time to watch the whole thing. We don't. Because it's 26 minutes and we've only got 20 minutes. So what we're dealing with is cylindrical shapes, still doing constructive line. Okay, so this unit or assignment is going to be dealing with a new kind of shape. So I just want to reiterate something we briefly touched on at the beginning, and that there are 3 shapes. So there's 3 fundamental shapes that we're dealing with, and we've kind of talked about this already. The planar shape is the first fundamental shape. And when I say fundamental, that means essential. That means everything in the universe that we can possibly imagine or think of can be drawn or understood in terms of the 3 fundamental shapes. So there's the planar or the rectilinear shape. So rectangular, square is what we've talked about, straight lines. And then number 2 is the cylindrical shape. And that's what we're working on during the second part of the first unit. So a cylindrical shape has some straight lines on the sides, as you can see here and here, but the tops are curvilinear. Okay, so that's the main difference between a cylindrical and a curvilinear shape. Now, a curvilinear shape can not have straight lines anywhere, like a hose shape, and still be considered a cylindrical shape. But what we're talking about is a round shape. And not a sphere, it's more like your arm is a cylindrical shape. Your leg is a cylindrical shape, okay? Now, this can either be a solid or a mass, or it can be a volume. So if I shade it using hatching, all of a sudden now it's a cup, which is hollow on the inside. And that means that it's a volume. And here you can see I'm shading so that there's a direction of light coming from the right-hand side, left-hand side, sorry. So that's the difference between a volume up top, and then you can see here I've done straight lines on the top, and that's going to be a plane, but it's still a cylindrical plane as opposed to a rectilinear plane. And that would be a mass because it's solid and not volumetric. And then the last of the 3 fundamental shapes is the spherical shape. And that's, of course, like a ball or a planet or an apple. And then, of course, all of the other shapes in the world are kind of hybridizations of these 3 shapes. Sorry. So planar, cylindrical, spherical are the 3 fundamental shapes. Now you notice that this particular cylindrical shape has a spherical bottom, so that becomes like a compound shape. All right, so with cylindrical shapes, what you're going to be dealing with is very similar to what we were dealing with in the box. So we know that the box top is a rectangle, but when it's in perspective, it's a plane going back in space. Well, a cylinder, if we look at it straight on, is a circle. But when it goes away from us in perspective, parallel with our line of sight, it becomes a plane. So like a quarter, like I'm drawing right now, is a plane, right? It's a planar cylinder. It's laying flat. So that top moves from being a circle into being what we know or call, can anybody guess? A circle seen in perspective is called a, all right. So for instance, rectangle, bird's eye view, raking or obtuse angle, it becomes a trapezoidal shape. Circle, bird's eye view, circle, and an obtuse or raking angle becomes an ellipse. It becomes an elliptical shape. So when we're looking at elliptical shapes, we're looking at the same thing that we were looking at in the box side or box top. If it's moving away from us, so you've got this ray of light going straight out of your eyes. If the plane or the surface is moving in the same direction as your line of sight, it starts to become obtuse in its angle, or raking in its angle. And the height and width differences change. So we know in a circle that the height and width are equal, right? The radius is the same from the center all the way around. But when it becomes an ellipse and lays flat, the height and width become unequal. Just like in a rectangle, where we have a certain height and width, when it lays flat, that height and width relationship from a bird's eye view completely changes because it's laying down, because it's moving away parallel to our line of sight. Any questions so far? And again, you can watch this whole thing. So here's a top view of a circular object. As I lay it flat, you notice that the height and width of that circle becomes unequal because it's parallel with our line of sight. So back here, it's perpendicular with our line of sight. Here, it becomes parallel. Height, width become unequal. And if we keep going, so height is about half the width in that case. As we move down even further, eventually it just becomes a straight line because we don't see any of that elliptical shape. So you can see as I twist it, the height and width relationship, the width stays the same, the height becomes shorter and shorter relative to that height or width. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes? Okay. So when we're looking at something in perspective that's elliptical or circular, so for instance here the height is half the width. Here the height is about a quarter of the width. You see what I mean? Here the height is about a sixth of the width, even smaller, until it becomes eye level and then it becomes just a straight line. So what we're doing is comparing height and width. So just like we were measuring box tops, you know, what does the top of the box, how does it relate to the height of the front of the box? Is it half? Is it a quarter, etc.? We're going to be doing those same sorts of measurements in these cylindrical drawings. So there I'm just showing that the bottom, if we were to draw it transparently, would be a repetition of the top. Now here's some mistakes that people make. An ellipse does not look like an eyeball. An ellipse does not have two corners at either side. An ellipse is rounded. And you'll notice that each quadrant is a reflection. So this, a reflection of that. This is a reflection of that. So these center lines of the horizontal and the vertical determine not only the height and the width, but they also enable you, when you're drawing that elliptical form, to create congruity between the left and the top and the bottom halves, so it doesn't look misshapen or distorted. Another mistake people make when they're drawing an elliptical shape, especially when they get into the body of the cylinder, is they get the sides right, but because it's sitting on a flat plane, they put a straight line at the bottom, and that doesn't work. That makes it look flat. So note the difference between this shape and this shape. All right, so I'm going to draw an ellipse, a cylindrical shape, and then I'm going to draw a horizontal picture plane, because that's what it looks like, right? The overall height and width of that cylinder is more horizontal than it is vertical. So I'm measuring height to width. Height from the back to the bottom is about 2/3 of the width. Do you see that? So if I want to make it as big as I can on the page, I'll start with my center line. I want it to fit within that center line. It should be 2/3 as high as it is wide. So there's the 2/3, a little bit past the center line. And now it's easy. All I got to do is take that and move it over. And now I have the width. Does that make sense to everybody? I'll show you another technique in a second. Now I want to figure out the height and width of the ellipse. So I've got to look at the overall height and say, how big is that relative to the overall height? Well, to me, it looks like it's I don't know what I'm doing here. Oh, I'm explaining that again. So to me, that looks like it's about 1/3, maybe 1/4. I think I decided it was 1/4. 2, 3, 4, right. So if I divide my vertical line into quarters, and then draw a line through the center of it, so a center horizontal line, then I know where that plane needs to be. Now the bottom, it's going to be the same. I draw a line the same distance that I drew this line down, make a mark directly across from it. That'd be my center line, and then I can draw the bottom. Does that make sense to everybody? Now there's another way to do it. So I'm going to draw another box or cylinder. Draw my center line, or hold my pencil up to find the center line. Determine how big I want it to be on the page. And now I draw, I hold up my pencil between the middle and the corner of that cylinder. And I find the angle. And I draw that angle. Now, of course, the other side needs to be exactly the same distance away. So I measure that distance and I measure that distance. I put a mark and I draw the same angle on the other side. You see? Now the next thing that I do is, just like I triangulated here, I triangulate from the center of that line to the corner of the ellipse. You see? And I draw that line and I get this kind of pyramidal form. You guys see that? Then all I got to do is draw a line straight up, a line straight up, draw that. Well, I think I'm going to do the ellipse first. So how big is that ellipse on the top relative to my height? It looks to be about 1/4. Does everybody see that? So there's the halfway point. Find the halfway point between there and there. That's where actually it should be a little lower. I think I even say that. Yeah, halfway. So it should be right there. There'd be 1/4. Okay. And then I draw a center line between those 2 points, the top and the bottom 1/4. And now I have my ellipse. And the easy part is the bottom. So if we're right, it should be the same distance, that half of the 1/4, or just draw a straight line between the 2 corners that we found through triangulation and connect with the ellipse. Does that make sense to everybody? How about you guys out there in La La Land?
It's good.
Okay.
Yes.
So you can watch this again. So let me tell you what your homework is so everybody's clear. So your homework is to rewatch that demonstration video. Okay, you know where to find it. And it should actually be under module 1. I apologize. Then you're going to draw 5 drawings in your sketchbook of cylindrical shapes, 1 per page, large scale, closed composition in pencil. Did everybody get the reference photos that I sent yesterday?
Yes.
Yes,
So
sir.
you're going to pick 5 of those to draw in your sketchbook as big as you can. And then by the beginning of class on Friday, you're going to start a new thread under Critique Discussion 2, Constructive Line Cylindrical Shapes. Okay, so again, if we go to discussions, you're going to go here, Critique Discussion 2, Constructive Line Cylindrical Shapes. You're going to upload, start a new thread, title it with your first and last name. Make sure each of the 5 images is titled like this: drawing 1, drawing 2, drawing 3, drawing 4, drawing 5, right? And then write a 100-word minimum critique due by the beginning of class Friday of your own work. And then you'll respond to 2 other students that you responded to different So 2 different students than you responded to previously in the last discussion, and that's due by midnight on Friday. Is everybody clear about that? So your homework is to take those reference photos, rewatch the video, and practice drawing 5 cylinders, 1 per page in your sketchbook, as large as they can be on the page without going off, close composition, in pencil, upload those 5 drawings, titled correctly, photographed well, to discussion critique number 2, under the discussion critiques. Write a 100-word minimum critique of your works, strengths and weaknesses. That's due by Friday morning. And then you will reply by Friday at midnight to 2 other students about their 5 homework drawings. I will send this email to you. Are there any questions? Are we cool? Huh?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are we cool like Fonzie? Does anybody know who Fonzie is? All right, Friday I'm going to teach you who Fonzie is. All right, you guys, have a great rest of your Wednesday, and we'll see you Friday.
Have a good day, sir.
You have a great day too.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good day.
Oh, and remember,